Hi, welcome back to Detective and Mystery Fiction. If you enjoy my content, please consider hitting the like button. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm notices me. Mr. Fortune's Trials by H.C. Bailey. Trial 4. The Hermit Crab. First published London Magazine, October 1924. Once upon a time, Mrs. Fortune, irritated by the sight of her husband lying on his back and thinking beautiful thoughts, asked him if he had ever done any work in his life. Reggie Fortune replied with dignity that he would be eternally honored among the great benefactors of humanity for his work. In the case of the hermit crab, he opened his eyes and smiled. "That is perhaps my masterpiece, Joan," said he. Mrs. Fortune showed him the tip of a red tongue. "Mormon," said she, yet it began innocently enough. It began, as Mrs. Fortune complains, soon after they were married. The Honourable Sidney Lomas, Chief of the Criminal Investigation Department, came in to a lazy Sunday lunch, and contemplating Mrs. Fortune with artistic approval, congratulated Mr. Fortune on his knowledge of women. I don't, Reggie Fortune protested. "I don't know anything about women, but I don't act as if I did. That is how I am wiser than all other men." The Honourable Sidney Lomas shook his head. "These experts," he sighed, "they never will tell you how they do the trick, will they, Mrs. Fortune? This profession of innocence is irritating, Reginald. How did you persuade her to marry you?" "How did I, Joan?" Mr. Fortune murmured dreamily. "I always wanted to be a mother to you, my dear," Mrs. Fortune explained to him. "And you were getting so fat." "He was," Lomas agreed with enthusiasm. "Nay, more he is. Are you sure that you are the right treatment for him? I think what he really needs is something sterner. I should recommend Miss Platt Robinson. Could you arrange for him to marry her too?" "If you think it would be for his good, Mr. Lomas," Mrs. Fortune said demurely. "It would be for mine," Lomas sighed. "But married people are so selfish. Who is your lady friend, Lomas?" "Does she want to be a mother to you?" Mr. Fortune asked. Lomas shuddered. "Not that. No, only a bore, not a mother. I'm afraid you haven't heard of Miss Platt Robinson, Reginald." "She would be annoyed. Philanthropist at large, isn't she?" "At large, unfortunately," Lomas agreed. "She's one of the earnest women who have made England what it is, Mrs. Fortune. She has lately become superintendent of the records department of the Ministry of Social Welfare." "Poor thing," said Mrs. Fortune. "I gather that isn't what the women in the records department call her." "Her appointment was a shameless job, wasn't it?" Fortune smiled. "My dear Fortune, there are no jobs in the civil service." "Forgive me," Reggie said meekly. "I do not understand these things. Miss Platt Robinson, sir, is one of those noble women who have given their lives to good works. Whenever you hear of a scheme to prevent people doing something and make them do something else, you may be sure Miss Platt Robinson is in it up to the neck. She was born to set everybody right. She had her big chance in the war, of course. She went round lecturing mothers and housewives on the joys of sacrifice. Then she looked after the manners and morals of young women in factories. And when she had won the war, some earnest, wealthy philanthropists felt that the country had to provide for Miss Platt Robinson. So she was pushed into the records department of the Ministry of Social Welfare. Hence these tears." "What do they do there?" Mrs. Fortune asked. Lomas shook his head. "No one knows. Miles of card indexes and box files and women. A dreadful place. And Miss Platt Robinson superintends." "Having come in over the heads of all the permanent staff," Fortune murmured. "Do birds in their little nests agree, Lomas?" "It was feared by some miserable cynics like you that there would be trouble. Old Bligh, he's secretary to the ministry, said it was the dirtiest work in his chief's corrupt career, and he hoped and believed the women in the records department would tear Miss Platt Robinson limb from limb. Some of them have been in the service 30 years. You wouldn't expect them to want an outsider put over their heads. And the woman who should have been made superintendent, Miss Thornton, has worked her way up from the bottom, and I'm told she's fit to run the empire. They all worship her." "They ought to have made a rebellion," said Mrs. Fortune. "I sometimes suspect you are a man, Joan," her husband sighed. "Women are conscientious. Women have a sense of duty." "They had," Lomas agreed. "They took Miss Platt Robinson to their bosoms. All was peace. Old Bligh was much annoyed, said it convinced him women were unfit for the public service. For months all was peace." He smiled at Mrs. Fortune. "Woman is the most patient of the animals. I don't know how long it would take Miss Platt Robinson to get on a woman's nerves, but she has now begun to receive attention." He took from his pocketbook a small sheet of drawing paper and gave it to Reggie. A scene from bird life. Artist unknown. Mr. Fortune looked at a sketch in watercolor. A young cuckoo ejecting a fledgling hedge sparrow from the maternal nest. Very neat and good. "I'm not a bird fancier myself, but I grasped the illusion. So did Miss Platt Robinson. She calls it a threatening letter, Reginald." "Is this the only one?" "No, the others are not illustrated. She had one which said, 'Did you think you could get away with it?' Not so, Platty." Several of them call her Platty or Platter. That annoys her particularly. She has had a dozen or so, none of them very long. One said her appointment was the scandal of the century. Another said, "We must draw the line somewhere, Platty." That's the general tone. They get more peevish as they go on. So does Miss Platt Robinson. She don't think much of Scotland Yard. She can't understand why we haven't found somebody to hang. "Why haven't you?" Mr. Fortune murmured. "My dear fellow, there's 300 women in the department. All the 300 may be in it. My fellows tell me she's put everybody's back up. She's been meddling at large, meddled with their luncheon hours, with their catering, with their holidays. Of course they kick." "I wonder," Reggie Fortune murmured. "It's not much in my way, Lomas. I like passion and gore. But there are points." He looked affectionately at the picture of the cuckoo, and the next morning found him at Scotland Yard. He was in time to assist at the interview between Mr. Wheely, the hoary old politician who was Minister of Social Welfare, and Lomas. Mr. Wheely came in like a lion. He was much distressed to find that the Criminal Investigation Department had done nothing to clear up this deplorable affair. He was compelled to say many unpleasant things, and he said them at length. "Now you've finished, sir," said Lomas placidly. "I've only to add that the staff of your ministry never gave any trouble till you appointed Miss Platt Robinson. However, if you want a criminal case over your appointment, I'll do what I can. I'm laying the papers before Mr. Fortune." "A very interesting case," Reggie smiled. But Mr. Wheely flinched. The name of Mr. Fortune meant murders to him. "Ah, really? Really? I am quite sure you will do everything that is possible. But the important thing is to settle the matter, to restore confidence and good feeling. We mustn't have any publicity, Mr. Lomas. I rely on you, my dear sir. Absolutely." He went out like a lamb. "What a nuisance politicians would be if they weren't all cowards," said Lomas. "Here are the papers, Reginald." Mr. Fortune examined a dozen letters. They had no resemblance except in the general style, which was mysterious and humorous. The writer or writers used paper of different kinds. Though all were good, the words were in script, or printed in different inks and with different pens. The letters had been posted in different parts of London, most of them in the West End. The general sense of them was that Miss Platt Robinson ought not to be superintendent, and would not be superintendent long. But there was no definite threat. "Anything strike you, Lomas?" Mr. Fortune smiled. "Nothing to take hold of?" Lomas shrugged. "Nothing criminal?" "Insubordinate, of course, written to the head of the department, not a police matter." "I wonder," Mr. Fortune said. "You know, there isn't any malice. They're not bitter, and they have humor. Very unusual anonymous letters. I would like to have a few words with Miss Platt Robinson." Lomas sighed. "She'll have the words. Reginald." They took a cab to the new Gaunt building, which is the home of the Records Department. They were led through long corridors of echoing concrete to the severe room, all whitewash and white paint, where on an island of carpet in the middle of a vast bare floor were the table and the chair of Miss Platt Robinson. Pictures of Joan of Arc and Florence Nightingale looked down upon her. She stood up between them, a large, plump woman in a dark coat frock. She had an extensive face, in which the eyes and the mouth stood out, an earnest, voluble face very pleased with itself, and she began to talk. She was glad to see Mr. Lomas. She felt it extraordinary that there had been so much delay in dealing with the case. She wished to remind Mr. Lomas that she had to think not only of herself, but of the women committed to her care. Attacks upon her she might afford to treat, as she did, with contempt, but it was too plain that their gross nature, their repetition, must have a deplorable influence upon the morale of the women on her staff. It was amazing to her. "Have you told the women here all about the letters?" Lomas broke in. Miss Platt Robinson said contemptuously that her secretary of course opened her letters. "And you don't trust your secretary?" "I trust everyone, Mr. Lomas. It is one of my principles. But I suppose you have some knowledge of the world. You should be aware that such things cannot be kept secret." "If my secretary couldn't keep secrets, I shouldn't keep him," Lomas said. Miss Platt Robinson said that she was not inclined to discharge a trusted woman on a vague suspicion. She was surprised to receive such advice. "We're not advising," said Reggie meekly. "We're asking questions. Do you suspect anyone?" "I do not allow myself to suspect, sir. It is one of my principles." "And very grateful and comforted," Mr. Fortune murmured. "But somebody painted the cuckoo. What is your theory, Miss Platt Robinson? Why did you get the bird?" "I am convinced, sir, that we have to deal with an attempt to undermine my authority in the department." "By whom?" "I am not a detective, sir. It is not possible for me to watch and investigate and obtain evidence. The case has been referred to your department, and I must leave it in your hands. I never meddle. That is one of my principles." Mr. Fortune lay back and smiled at the picture of Joan of Arc. "Thank you so much. I do like a free hand," he murmured. Miss Platt Robinson made an impatient noise. "But one really must point out, sir, that your handling of the affair has been deplorably feeble. The attacks are being continued. Only this morning one had an outrageous thing." She opened a drawer in her table and drew out a parcel. "Kindly examine that." Mr. Fortune looked at the address. It was in printed letters. The parcel had been posted in West London. It was made up of a tin box, which was packed with seaweed. From this he drew forth a large whelk shell. Out of the shell protruded the front claws of a crab. "Good gad," said Lomas. "What is the meaning of that, madame?" "I wonder how you can ask me," Miss Platt Robinson cried. Reggie had laid down the shell and the crab. He was poking a curious finger inside the box into the seaweed, which contained little lumps of red sand and shell. "What is the thing, Fortune?" Lomas said. Reggie looked up. His round, cherubic face was solemn. "What? This gentleman?" He lifted the whelk shell. "Oh, he's Pagurus bernhardus, a hermit crab." "Why should the creature be sent to me?" said Miss Platt Robinson. "The hermit crab, madame, in the inscrutable wisdom of Providence, is given a naked and tender abdomen. He is, therefore, tempted to shelter it in other people's property. He evicts the whelk and finds a safe and comfortable situation. Here you see him." Lomas smiled. "So this is a variation on the theme of the cuckoo?" "I fear so." Reggie shook his head. "I fear so." He put the hermit crab back into the seaweed and carefully packed it up again. "This is positively outrageous," said Miss Platt Robinson. Into the room came a small, brisk woman. "I think you had better read these. Oh, I beg your pardon. I will bring them when you're free." She was gone again. It seemed to Reggie Fortune that the frown which Miss Platt Robinson sent after her had a certain acidity. "Well, well," he said. "And not one of these queer things has suggested to you any person who don't like you?" The prominent eyes of Miss Platt Robinson stared at him. Miss Platt Robinson seemed to struggle with emotions. "It must be someone who has lost all sense of decency," she exploded. Jealousy, I suppose. She burrowed among the papers on her desk. Mr. Fortune lay back and winked at the picture of Florence Nightingale. Miss Platt Robinson took up a strip of yellow paper and gazed at it eagerly. "I should advise you to compare that writing with the anonymous letters, sir," she said. It was a note about the practice of the department. It was in a clear, bold hand. "And who wrote this, madame?" Miss Platt Robinson hesitated. "I should prefer to leave you to draw your own conclusions, sir." "We will," said Reggie, and he took up the box with the hermit crab. "It's a very interesting case." "Good morning." "Interesting," Miss Platt Robinson gasped. Outside, in the long gaunt corridor, Reggie and Lomas were submerged in a flood of young women going to lunch with earnest haste. "The female of the species is more dreadful than the male," Reggie murmured. "Hold my hand, Lomas, I'm frightened. They look very determined. I'm not good enough to die. What an awful place this is. A labyrinth full of women. Fancy being lost here." They emerged at last into sunshine and the street. "Lunch is strongly indicated," Reggie sighed relief. "Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die." "But why are you so rattled, Reginald?" "How can you ask? You also were present. Something will come of this. I hope it mayn't be human gore." "The woman's a fool," said Lomas. "Some humorist's been pulling her leg. That's all there is to it." "I wonder. Not a nice woman, Lomas. Not really a nice woman." "Well, I don't mind owning I shouldn't like anybody to send me a dead crab in a whelk shell. I fear I should be peevish. The hermit crab upset her, didn't it? She had suspicions all right after that. Do you know the writing she gave me as a sample?" "Confound her," said Lomas. "It's her assistant's, Miss Thornton's. She was the little woman who blew in. She's been in the office all her life. She ought to be superintendent now if she had her rights. Does she think so?" "How can she help thinking so?" "As you say," Reggie nodded. "That writing looks possible. The anonymous letters are disguise, of course. What's Miss Thornton's reputation?" "One of the best. Good gad. I hope she hasn't lost her head. It would be an infernal shame if she's ruined herself over the Platt Robinson. Somebody's lost her head." Reggie smiled. "You can't tell what a woman won't do when she begins to hate another woman," Lomas pronounced. "They all run mad then, even the best of them." Yes. There was some nasty temper about, I wonder." "Confound you, what do you think of it yourself?" "I don't think. I haven't enough facts. I only wonder. Very interesting case." "I wonder what they'll be up to next." Lomas chuckled. "It won't be easy to beat the hermit crab. Mr. Fortune possesses the faculty of remaining awake after a large lunch. He spent the afternoon in a scientific investigation of the hermit crab, and the packing, and the tin. In the evening his wife found him benign but pensive. In the morning she heard with regret that their chauffeur and factotum, Sam, had gone to the seaside for a day or two. Mr. Fortune offered to drive her himself. She shuddered. Reggie Fortune's driving is the triumph of mind over matter. For some days nothing else disturbed their happiness. Mr. Fortune asking over the telephone whether Miss Platt Robinson had received any more congratulations was told that she had gone on holiday. Sam, the chauffeur, came back to his job, and one morning the voice of Lomas spoke over the telephone. "Reginald, are you there? You are quite sure you are there? You haven't eloped with Miss Platt Robinson?" "I hadn't noticed it. This is very suspicious. Better come around and prove an alibi." Sam drove Mr. Fortune to Scotland Yard. "What is this unseemly jest, Lomas? I am a good young husband." "Anything you say will be used as evidence against you. Now, Reggie, where is she?" "Oh, my aunt, is she really gone?" "The Vanishing Lady. A New Illusion by Miss Platt Robinson. This morning, Lady Bandicott. Do you know Lady Bandicott?" Reggie held up his hands. "Lady Bandicott is one of our most earnest social reformers." "Quite so. She came round with her tail fluffed out and her back up. She had a meeting yesterday at which Miss Platt Robinson was to make a speech on the modern woman. Miss Platt Robinson didn't turn up." The evidence is that she left her house early the day before yesterday without luggage. She didn't even say when she was coming back. She hasn't been seen since." "Well, well," said Reggie Fortune. "And what's Lady Bandicot's view?" Lady Bandicot points out that never before in our Fair Island story did Miss Platt Robinson fail to make a speech when she had the chance. She argues that it was no small thing which stopped her from making a speech. She suggests that Miss Platt Robinson has been made away with by some wicked enemy of the rights of women, or some disgruntled female in her office. It is an interesting case, isn't it? Mr. Fortune smiled. "And what does the chief of the Criminal Investigation Department make of it?" "I think it's a case for a medical man, Reginald. I suppose the wretched woman is off her head. Lost her memory, or had a nervous breakdown. Didn't she look like it?" "I wonder, where did she live, Thomas?" "Miss Platt Robinson had a new house in a garden suburb, in a room where the paint and curtain glared at each other across angular furniture, which insisted that no man had ever thought of making furniture like it before. Reggie and Lomas conferred with a grim housekeeper. Miss Platt Robinson had said nothing when she went out, but that she would not be in to lunch. She went out alone. She had no one call on her that morning. Lady Flora Norton called the day before. Reggie, who was playing with the things on the writing table, looked up. An old friend. Lady Flora worked under Miss Platt Robinson during the war. She was Lady Flora Holmbury then, of course. Miss Platt Robinson certainly had some letters the morning before she went out. She always had many letters. The housekeeper could not say if there were any friends she was likely to visit. She had many friends. "Yes, yes. We'll find them in the address book here, no doubt," Reggie said. "Thanks very much. We'll ring when we've finished." The housekeeper started at this abrupt dismissal and went out reluctantly. "What have you got, Reginald?" Lomas came to him. Mr. Fortune took from the pages of the blotting book an envelope addressed in a bold hand to Miss Robinson. "Good gad! Another letter." Lomas drew out a sheet on which was written, "You will not be superintendent long." That doesn't seem much to run away from. I suppose there was something more. Reggie was going over the writing table. "No, nothing more," he said. "Only that and nothing more. A very interesting case. Some of these drawers are locked. Yes, yes. I don't know how far you're going into Miss Platt Robinson's secrets. I want my lunch. I want to know how this letter came here. It didn't come by post." "No, it didn't come by post," Reggie agreed. "Goodbye." "Confound you, Fortune. This is serious." "I know. That's why I'm going. I'm going to lunch with the hermit crab. Goodbye." To his waiting chauffeur, Mr. Fortune said, "Liverpool Street." "Won't the car do it, sir?" Sam smiled. "You're so romantic, Sam. I want a luncheon car." In the afternoon sunshine, Mr. Fortune arrived upon the seafront of Walton-on-the-Naze. The summer was still young, the beach not crowded. Though the tide was high, only a few bathers disturbed the glittering steel sea. Mr. Fortune walked northwards with a roving eye for them and the little groups that took the air on the promenade. But he saw no one who detained him, and when he came to the end of the promenade, he strode on northward still, by the path at the edge of the tall green corn above the sea. At the point where the coast opens to make the wide inlet of Harford Water, he sat down on a stone groin and contemplated the landscape. Only a flock of sheep grazing in the salt meadows and the gleam and call of plovers disturbed the solitude. The tide was rising still but almost full, and from the groin to the grass of the low islands, the water shone grey. "Yes, a soothing harmony," he murmured. "I like these damsels." And he rose lazily and went on by the path which rims above the shore between hedges of tamarisk. He saw on one of the islands white tents. When he was as near to it as he could get, he came out from the tamarisk and stood by the water. From the island, girls were bathing. Mr. Fortune lit a cigar and watched them with artistic approval. They had a boat out. They swam to it, dived dark lithe shapes curving pleasantly in the sunshine with a gleam of white arms and legs. Mr. Fortune approved and clapped. The girl who was steering the boat turned. Another girl climbed into the bows and shaded her eyes to look. Mr. Fortune took off his hat. There was conversation on the sea, heads bobbing tip and clustering round the boat and gazing at the intrusive man. Then they vanished into the water like seats. The girl at the tiller bent down, the motor began to throb, and the boat made for Mr. Fortune. 50 yards from the shore, the engine was stopped. "What's your trouble?" the girl cried, and she let her boat drift in to stare at him. "I've come to call," said Fortune. "At home 6 Mondays," said the girl. "But I'm sure Miss Platt Robinson would like to see me," said Mr. Fortune meekly. "Poor you." She smiled. She had a thin brown face which became pugnacious when she smiled. "Come on then." Fortune looked with pathos at the yards of water between him and the boat. "Be a little man," she exhorted him. "Nana's watching." But she brought the boat in nearer. "Baby paddle now?" Reggie Fortune, though plump, has agility. He ran down the battic and jumped, arriving in the bows of the rocking boat on all fonts. "You owl," said the girl. "You nearly had her over." "Then it would have been my duty and my delight to save your life," Reggie smiled. "Save your grandmother," said the girl, and started her engine. Mr. Fortune made his way aft to her side. She was clothed in engineer's overalls, from the trousers of which little bare feet came out. She tucked them under her. "Don't you mind me, Jonah," she said. "You look about for a whale." The boat made for the island at the rate of knots. "Do you get many whales?" Reggie smiled. "I thought you were catching crabs." The girl stared at him. "It's a clever little man, isn't it?" she said. The island was near. A group of girls, some still in bathing dresses, some in sweaters and shorts, stood on the beach watching. "And very picturesque too," said Mr. Fortune. "But embarrassing, you know. I never had so many ladies take an interest in me all at once. Feet cold?" The girl's warlike smile flashed at him. She stopped the engine and heaved her little anchor over the gunwale. The boat brought up in shallow water. "Who is your young man, Vi?" a clear voice hailed. "Little Jonah looking for a whale," the girl said. She was rolling up her trousers. "Come and paddle, ducky. Nana will hold your hand." Mr. Fortune took off his shoes and socks. "There's a brave man," said she, and they splashed together to the beach. Mr. Fortune, holding his shoes in one hand, took off his hat with the other to a cluster of smiles. "I hope I don't intrude," he said, and heard a camera click at him. "Sir, the pleasure is ours," said somebody who consisted chiefly of a mop of chestnut hair. Mr. Fortune became confidential. "Would you mind to introduce me to the hostess?" The small person made a curtsy in the grand style, a work of art made piquant by her shorts and her bare knees, and rising from it showed him beneath chestnut hair a comical little face with no nose to speak of but large and dangerous eyes. "So charming of you to give us the pleasure," she murmured in a conventional voice. "We were just going to tea." She put her hand in his arm and led him towards the tents. Mr. Fortune's feet dragged. Mr. Fortune saw the shape of Miss Platt Robinson. Mr. Fortune gasped slightly. Not as once she sat majestic between Florence Nightingale and Joan of Arc, Miss Platt Robinson walked the island. That plump, important shape was clothed in a sweater and shorts. Mr. Fortune averted his eyes. So did not she. Her prominent eyes swelled and glared from a red face. "Mr. Fortune!" she cried. "Positively outrageous!" "Platty," said the little creature on Mr. Fortune's arm. "Potatoes, Platty." 2 of the girls took Miss Platt Robinson and led her gently but firmly away. Mr. Fortune was taken to the tents where 2 oil stoves were roaring beneath kettles and several deck chairs stood. "Won't you sit down?" said the little creature in her conventional voice. "Tea, children." "May I put on my shoes?" Reggie murmured. "If you think you'll feel safer," she smiled. He subsided onto the grass. He put on his shoes. He gazed at Miss Platt Robinson, who also sat on the wound but afar off with a pail between her legs, scraping a potato in a slow time, a tragic woman. She gave a lot of trouble. The little creature smiled. But I think she's beginning to grasp things. What things? Said Mr. Fortune anxiously. The great realities. If you don't work, you don't eat. Platty has to scrape the potatoes for dinner before she has her tea. Mr. Fortune gazed at her in alarm. But a girl brought him a cup and buttered biscuits. He found himself the center of a ring of curious and amused girls. "Do you know all my young people?" said the little creature in her conventional voice. "Vi, Hoodlums, the Wogger, Belinda." She reeled off a string of names and nicknames and laughed. "And you're Daniel in the lion's den, aren't you? What's your second name, Daniel?" "I am called Fortune," said Reggie meekly. "The Scotland Yard man," she cried. "Oh, good work." Yes, I am rather proud of it myself," Reggie murmured. There were emotions among the sweaters. Someone pointed a finger at the slim, dark girl of the bat. "You've done it now, Vi. This is your fatal weakness for policemen. He's better here than spying on land." Vi smiled at him. "It's a long, long way to Tipperary, isn't it, Mr. Policeman?" She waved her hand to the surrounding sea. "Yes, he's better here," the little person pronounced. "But how in the name of wonder did he get here? Prisoner, what brought you to the premises?" "May I smoke?" Reggie smiled and lit a cigar. "Thanks. Well, the reasons were primarily geological. If there's any leg pulling, we'll do it, thank you." "I wouldn't dream of it." Reggie swept a deprecating glance round the circle of Amazons. "It's unnecessary. The reasons were primarily geological, secondarily gastronomic or culinary. Somebody sent a hermit crab to Miss Platt Robinson." "Oh, help! Platty didn't eat him, did she?" The little person gurgled. "Is a hermit crab a crime, Constable?" said Vi. "The answer to both questions is in the negative," said Mr. Fortune gravely. "A hermit crab isn't even a clue. He might have come from anywhere round England. But his packing was very interesting. Seaweed with some little lumps of sand caught in it, hard red lumps with lighter veins partly shell." He smiled at the small creature. "That gave me the hermit crab's address, you see, miss. I'm sorry I didn't catch your name." "Couldn't you guess that from the seaweed?" said the little creature. "Bad luck. But you were quite clever, weren't you? What did you find in the sand?" Mr. Fortune shook his head at her. "No, not clever, only painstaking. All for your good. I found bits of Trophon contrarius." "Is it catching?" "No. It's a shellfish of the past. Of the Pliocene, in fact, some time before you were born. It indicated that the sand was red crag. Red crag only comes down to the sea between Felixstowe and Frinton. We come next to the gastronomic evidence provided by the tin. That tin had held pigeon pie. There were still fragments adhering. Well, one doesn't buy pigeon pie in tins for ordinary household purposes. So it emerged that somebody who was living in a boat or in camp on this bit of coast took a friendly interest in Miss Platt Robinson. I sent a man down to look for ladies living the simple life near Walton. He discovered your island. So when Miss Platt Robinson vanished, I came to call." He smiled. "That's my half of the story. I should like to hear yours, miss. It really would be friendly to tell me your name." The little person looked at him profoundly. She had greenish eyes flecked with brown. Curious eyes which laughed in their solemnity. She said nothing. It was Vi who spoke with that pugnacious smile of hers. "Does your mother know you're out, Mr. Fortune?" "You alarm me, madame." "That was the idea. You might be here a long time. Quite a long time. You might be peeling potatoes, same as Platty. You might be helping her wash up. Platty would like to have somebody else wash up. Especially the bacon plates. We'd lend you some clothes, too. You'd look like a Boy Scout." Mr. Fortune sighed. "You don't do me justice, you know. I'm really kind at heart. I don't want you to get into serious trouble." "I should worry," Vi laughed. "Well, Snooky, what about him? He wants chastening." "Don't be an owl," said the little person. "Mr. Fortune, you mean if we don't let you go off with Platty, there'll be policemen coming to the island?" "It is only too likely, miss." "Well, what of it? You came here of your own choice." "So did Platty. She stood there on the groin looking like a pelican in the wilderness. Of course, we sent the boat across. When she was getting in, she fell into the sea. So we lent her clothes while her own were drying. Then she wouldn't do her share of the washing up. So Platty was made kitchen orderly. No work, no meals for Platty. We're nice girls who rescue the perishing. We're good girls who are finding work for a forlorn female. Helping the unemployed. We're not afraid of your policeman, Mr. Fortune. You don't begin at the beginning, do you? Reggie smiled. What brought Miss Platt Robinson down to Walton Point, Lady Flora? You pig, the little person cried. You knew me all the time. You see, that's my job, to know all the time, Reggie said meekly. But I don't. I don't know what Miss Platt Robinson will be up to when she gets back to land. There's threatening letters. There's assault. There's kidnapping. There isn't. Lady Flora was shrill. She came of her own silly, nasty mind. Oh, cut it out, Vi said. Let's maroon 'em together, Snooky. Lady Flora's green eyes gleamed gold. That's a solution. Not tonight, said Reggie, looking at the sea. The tide was far out. The island was surrounded by wide banks of muddy sand on which the boat lay high and dry. Lots of time to talk it over, Lady Flora. Do tell me how you brought her down here. Lady Flora considered him again. She looked round at her cohort of girls. Is he human? Who thinks he's human? A number of hands went up. Who thinks he's a pig? Vi voted for that with a frown. Mr. Fortune is human. Sir, listen to the story of our young lives. In the war we were all good little girls making shells. Some fiend sent Flatty down as a welfare worker to our factory. Before we knew where we were, our superintendent was booted out, and Platty had her job. That's Platty's little way. She's the world's worst wangler, and then she made us all happy. Platty's great on discipline. Platty's idea of discipline is making a girl do everything she don't want the way she hates to do it. She altered all our shifts. She upset all our days off. She turned down half the forewomen and put in a mob of her own. We used to call them Platty's Spy Corps. Oh, it was a merry old time. We should have had our own private revolution if the Germans hadn't started theirs first. The armistice shut the factory down just in time to save Platty's neck. Well, we burnt Platty in effigy on armistice night and resumed the life of peace. But we didn't forget her. And when we heard she'd wangled another big job, it was felt something had to be done about it. We remonstrated with her by hermit crabs and so forth. But Platty went on her wicked way. We heard she was disciplining the poor girls in the records department, same like she disciplined us. Then we took action. I called on Platty. She's always been a little afraid of me. I don't wonder, Reggie murmured. Poor me, said Lady Flora. No, sir, it's the title that does it. Platty's a snob. Well, I called. I was friendly but patronizing. I congratulated her on her appointment. I hoped, kind but cold, I hoped she'd make good. I understood the girls in the records department were a wild and wanton crowd. Flatty said it was too true, but she was introducing discipline. I hoped so, superior and incredulous. I had heard there was a party of them down here in Camp Shockin, the whole East Coast, by their costume and conduct. Platty jumped at it. Where were they? Who were they? What were they up to? So I gave her the address, and the next time I saw our Platty, she was standing there on the point goggling at us. Wasn't she asking for it, Mr. Fortune? We brought her over, and we gave her discipline. If she isn't a brighter and a better woman, it's not our fault. We've been quite firm with the flatter. She's had to do lots of things she didn't want the way she hates to do them. Look at her now. Miss Platt Robinson stood glowering at a fire which smoked sullenly beneath a black cauldron. Platty's evening hate. She cannot make a fire burn, and if it won't burn, Platty has to wash up in cold water. So good for Platty. The pains we take with her, Mr. Fortune. Yes, yes, said Reggie dreamily. Fellows who write plays tell me it's the last act that's the trouble. How's it going to end, Lady Flora? I don't see how it can end happily. Dear me, Mr. Fortune, the little creature resumed her conventional voice. I thought you had come here to clear it all up. That's what policemen are for, isn't it? Policemen are human, you know. They feel for Miss Platt Robinson. She's a woman and a sister. And sisters can be very unpleasant sometimes. Haven't you noticed it? You don't think she's grateful, Mr. Fortune? Said the little creature sadly. Speaking from observation, I fear she isn't grateful. Speaking from experience, I'm sure she has no sense of humor. And speaking for myself, I'm frightened. What did you think of doing with her? We thought a week's education would be enough, Mr. Fortune. You'll have police here before that. You'll be in a police court for threatening letters, assault, and anything else Miss Platt Robinson's lawyers can think of. Then it would all come out. The green eyes laughed. How gorgeous! But she'd never risk it, Mr. Fortune. Think of Platty's prestige. Think of the girls in the records department chortling. She'd risk it all right, said Reggie sadly. Aren't you a little hard on Miss Platt Robinson? You might give her a chance. You'll have to let her go soon. Why not do it prettily? Let her go now if she'll kiss and be friends. Mr. Fortune, you're a wangler yourself, the little creature cried. She shan't kiss me, someone said fervently. It seemed to be the general feeling. No doubt that can be arranged. Mr. Fortune smiled upon them. All right. It's got to end some time, Lady Flora said. Shall he wangle? Hands went up. Shall he not wangle? Only the black-browed Vi opposed. Go and wangle, sir. First prize for courage, our Fortune. Miss Platt Robinson, surrounded by wood smoke, had a rather ghostly appearance. This is a distressing situation, madame, said Reggie. She struggled with passions. What are you doing here? She exploded. I'm trying to get you away, but your friends seem to be very determined young people. My friends, Miss Platt Robinson gasped. Don't you understand that this is an abominable outrage? Look at me. I do, said Reggie, and looked away. Oh, Miss Platt Robinson, why did you come here? I was kidnapped, sir. But you came alone. We found that out, all the way from London to Walton Point, and these damsels say you asked them to ferry you over. It's a conspiracy, Mr. Fortune, said Miss Platt Robinson vehemently. These wretched girls wanted to get me in their power. That creature, Lady Flora, told me there was a party of my girls from the records department out here behaving scandalously. I considered it my duty to investigate, and look how they treated me. Do you really want people to look at you? Reggie said with emotion. I mean to say, we can bring some police over here and rescue you, but do you want policemen assisting you in this, negligee? It's perfectly disgraceful, Miss Platt Robinson faltered. I'm only thinking of you, Reggie murmured. You see, these young women say they didn't ask you to come, and they won't help you to go, and while you stay you'll have to work for your living. But that's outrageous, Miss Platt Robinson whimpered. But the only answer is policemen, and you're in a sweater and shorts. I don't know what they've done with my clothes. They've no right to keep my clothes. It's theft, at least. I can prosecute them all. Theft and kidnapping and conspiracy. Oh, they'll be sorry for this. I shouldn't count on it. Reggie shook his head. Are you quite sure you want to prosecute, Miss Platt Robinson? If you take 'em into court, they'll bring out the whole story. I'm only thinking of you. Do you want to be cross-examined about your camp life? Very sad reading for your girls in the records department. And, speaking officially, I doubt if you'll get a conviction. They'll say you would come where you weren't wanted, and they fished you out of the sea and gave you dry clothes and— But they won't let me go, Miss Platt Robinson wailed. Oh, Mr. Fortune, you must do something. It is a distressing situation, Reggie agreed. They're not fond of you, you know. They seem to think you haven't been nice to them. Why not try it? Bury the past. You want to get away. You don't want scandal. Well, kiss and be friends. Tell them if they put you ashore in your own clothes, next tide you won't prosecute. Miss Platt Robinson stared at him. But I told them that yesterday, she cried. They only laughed at me. Is it possible they didn't trust you? Reggie sighed. This is very painful. I wonder if they'll trust me. Do try, Mr. Fortune. Freedom and your own skirt and no prosecution. Reggie held out his hand. Promise? Of course. Miss Platt Robinson took his hand gingerly. Reggie strolled back to the circle of girls by the tents. Peace with honor. You put her ashore in the morning clothed and in her right mind. She don't prosecute. Good for Platty, said Lady Flora. No more washing up for Platty. Reveal Platty's clothes, Vi. She'll want to dress for dinner. She did, but she was not sociable. Except towards the lemon cheesecakes, her manner was restrained. She retired early, desiring to be put ashore as soon as possible in the morning. The flap of a tent fell behind her. "Well done, Platty," said Lady Flora. "Didn't she behave prettily? Not one rude word. Quite a reformed character. I thought we could educate her. Those women in her department won't know their Platty." She sighed. "What have I done for thee, England, my England?" The last of the sunset lingered rosy. The moon was rising out of a gleam of silver on the sea, and from the mainland came faintly the bleating of sheep. "All is peace, and I feel so good. It's quite disconcerting, Mr. Fortune." "Yes, I shouldn't let that worry you," said Reggie. Between a ground sheet and a rug he dozed uneasily through that night. Stiff, crumpled and unshorn in a blaze of morning sunshine, he was landed beside Miss Platt Robinson on Walton Point. She was primly neat. He had never disliked her so much. From the island came 3 joyful cheers. "Really?" Miss Platt Robinson muttered and set her lips. "I quite agree with you," said Reggie heartily. But she had no more to say, and she strode out at a round pace. When they came to the town, "I was thinking of a bath and some breakfast," he ventured. "I am taking the first train to London," said she. Reggie sighed relief and turned into a barber's. The next morning, among his letters, he found one from Lady Flora. "Dear Mr. F0RTUNE, perhaps it would be good for you to have these, with our love." These were photographs, chiefly of Miss Platt Robinson. Miss Platt Robinson was shown in sweater and shorts blowing the fire, scraping the potatoes, washing the dishes. But what Mr. Fortune stared at was the postscript, for Lady Flora had written, "Wouldn't they look nice in the picture papers?" Mrs. Fortune was allured by his expression. "Reggie, have you told me all?" said she tragically, and she came to look. "Oh, bless her, my dear, they ought to have taken her for the movies." "I shouldn't wonder if they did," said Reggie morosely. "But what is this?" She found a photograph of Reggie walking barefoot, with his shoes in his hand and bowing. "Oh, you precious. I want this enlarged." "You have no heart, Joan," Reggie complained. "No woman has any heart." Mrs. Fortune gurgled. She had found another photograph of him putting on his shoes, while a circle of girls admired him. "But it's a Mormon," said she. "A nice, shy Mormon." At this point, a maid came in to say that Mr. Lomas had rung up to ask Mr. Fortune to go to Scotland Yard at once. Lomas received him severely. "You wired me that the Platt Robinson was returning safe and in good condition." "Oh, my aunt," Reggie gasped. "Didn't she?" "I don't know whether you're mad or she is. As far as I can make out, you've been compounding felony and committing high treason and being no gentleman. Look at that." It was a letter of many sheets, a formal complaint from Miss Platt Robinson to the chief of the Criminal Investigation Department that she had been kidnapped and kept in captivity by a party of women acting in collusion with one of his officials, Mr. Reginald Fortune. She proposed to call on Mr. Lomas and lay the facts before him. She expected him to take drastic action on her behalf. "She's not a nice woman, Lomas," said Reggie sadly. "Not really a nice woman. Good gad, don't be futile. The woman's capable of dragging the department into a big scandal. What are the facts?" So Reggie told him. Reggie showed him the photographs. He was profoundly moved. "Poor wretch, I don't wonder she's peevish." "No, I thought she was peevish. Do you wonder I told her to hush it up?" "It's the only thing to do, of course. She'd ruin her position if she drags all this out." "Good gad. Think of these snapshots in the picture papers." "I do," said Reggie. "I'm in 1 or 2. Lady Flora's very resourceful." "Oh, the Platt Robinson must let it drop. I'll manage her." "I wonder," Reggie sighed. "I can frighten her," said Lomas. And Miss Platt Robinson came. Lomas put up his eyeglass. Lomas glared at her. Lomas rang for a shorthand writer. "Sit down, madame. You have made a grave charge against a trusted adviser of mine. Mr. Fortune will be present at this interview. I'm having a note taken of all that you say. Let me warn you that I am acquainted with all the facts and approve of Mr. Fortune's action throughout. It is entirely owing to his skill and resource that you have been saved from a distressing situation to which you had come by your own folly. You are now breaking a promise which you made in your own interests. You are bringing a false charge against him." I warn you that anything you say without foundation will involve you in very serious consequences." Miss Platt Robinson flinched. She did not expect to be treated like this. She had been outrageously treated. She wanted those women punished. "You undertook not to prosecute them in order to prevent the practical joke which they had played on you being made public. Mr. Fortune gave you good advice. You want to break that undertaking. Do you want to see these photographs in the picture papers?" He handed them across the table. "Oh, abominable!" Miss Platt Robinson cried and crushed them into a ball. "They have the negatives, you know. Do you want to make it public you roused such ill feeling in the department you last controlled that the women determined to punish you like this? What am I to do? Is nothing to be done for me? We have done a great deal for you. We have extricated you from a most unpleasant situation without scandal. It is more than your conduct gave you a right to expect. I have done with the case. No one is to be punished." Miss Platt Robinson gasped. "What about all those threatening letters I had?" "Threats? I have read no threats." "Insulting. Have you any proof who wrote them?" "We have none." "You don't want proof?" Miss Platt Robinson cried. "Good morning, madame," said Lomas, and when she had gone he smiled on Reggie. "I wonder," Reggie murmured. "You know, I should put a man to watch her, Lomas. I don't think she's safe." "Good gad." Lomas dropped his eyeglass and his smile. "What can she do? Assassinate Lady Flora? Or do you think Lady Flora's rascals will be after her again?" "Some nice quiet man," Reggie murmured. "She's not safe alone." It was a month afterwards that Mr. Fortune, visiting Lomas on the matter of the infested marmoset, a crime, you remember, of passion, was shown the report of the detectives who had been observing Miss Platt Robinson. No one had attempted to interfere with the lady. She had gone nowhere except to a few public meetings, and several times on a jaunt by bus in the evening from her suburb to Finsbury Park. Not worthwhile keeping the men on the job, is it? Lomas shrugged. Evidently Lady Flora's finished with her, and she's not meddling with Lady Flora. "But why Finsbury Park?" said Reggie. "Lots of nice places near her home. What does she do at Finsbury Park?" "I could bear to know that, Lomas." "My dear fellow, lots of simple people like a bus ride on a summer evening." "She's not simple," Reggie protested. "Not at all a nice woman, Lomas. Tell your fellows to find out what she does at Finsbury Park." "Oh, very well," Lomas shrugged. "You've got Miss Platt Robinson on your nerves, Reginald." I have. 2 weeks later there came to Lomas a letter from the Minister of Social Welfare. Mr. Wheely regretted to find that the Criminal Investigation Department had failed to discover the author of the threatening letters received by Miss Platt Robinson. Emboldened, he was compelled to assume, by this strange inertia of the police, this person had now sent letters of a more scandalous character. Very fortunately, however, impunity had made the author rash. If Mr. Lomas would kindly call upon him, he would be able to point out evidence which must lead to drastic action. "Yes, I shouldn't wonder if he's right." Mr. Fortune smiled. "You know this woman's a public nuisance," Lomas groaned. "Who's after her now?" "Have you got that letter we found in her blotting book?" "Of course I have. All the Platt Robinson communications, except the hermit crab. You had that. He wouldn't keep, but the letter will. We never found out how it came to her, you know. It wasn't posted." "No, it wasn't posted," Reggie smiled. "That's what's interesting. Lomas, my dear old thing, what about Finsbury Park? What did Miss Platt Robinson do at Finsbury Park?" Lomas rang for the reports. They testified that on 3 nights during the past fortnight, Miss Platt Robinson had posted a letter, once certainly a blue letter, in a certain pillar box at Finsbury Park. "Very sound man, that man," Reggie murmured, and turned the pages of the London directory. "Pillar box at the corner of Curtis Road and Garden Road." "Garden Road?" "Yes. Lomas, dear, ring up Mr. Wheely and tell him we'll come round to him now, if he'll have Miss Platt Robinson and her letters ready for us." "I don't see my way," Lomas protested. "My dear fellow, oh my dear fellow," Reggie chuckled. "Then leave it to me." They found Mr. Wheely frowning majestically, guarded by a cynical secretary who did not conceal his disgust for the whole affair. Over against him, Miss Platt Robinson swelled and preened herself. Mr. Wheely spoke. He had to complain of the manner in which the Criminal Investigation Department had handled this serious case. He was bound to say he desired to point, but, he must add, and he had only to remark in conclusion. It was deplorable that inertia, he did not wish to use the word incompetence, should expose a valued public servant to such persecution. "Yes, it will save time if we come to the facts, sir," Reggie said. "I understand Miss Platt Robinson has received some fresh letters. Where are they?" Mr. Wheely again delivered an oration. The secretary handed Reggie 6 letters. They were on pale blue rough paper. They were in a bold hand. Their tone was alike. The last said, "Do not imagine you will be allowed to stay here. We shall get you out somehow. No outsiders here. The civil service does not want them. I have had more than enough of your meddling. I have friends and influence behind me. You will not be superintendent long." Reggie read it aloud. "Very painful. The work of a spiteful and cunning mind," he said gravely, "and Miss Platt Robinson has evidence who was the writer. Look at the postmark, please." Miss Platt Robinson smiled. "Posted last Friday, N4, the others the same." "N4 is Finsbury Park," said Miss Platt Robinson. "Perhaps Mr. Fortune will compare the writing with this." She handed him an official document signed E. Thornton. "Surely I have seen this writing before." Reggie frowned. "Do you know her?" Miss Platt Robinson cried. "I have only met her in your room, madame. When we were investigating the earlier letters, you gave me a document written by your assistant superintendent. You suspected her then." "I have always suspected her," Miss Platt Robinson cried. "Don't you see the likeness?" "It leaps to the eye," said Mr. Wheely. "Yes, positively, I am compelled to say. It leaps to the eye." "And Miss Thornton lives at Finsbury Park," Miss Platt Robinson cried in triumph. 23 Garden Road, Finsbury Park. That is the paper she uses. Look, here is a note of hers. She writes with a J-nib. "You've prepared the evidence very carefully, madam," Reggie said. "The writing is surely conclusive," Mr. Wheely pronounced. "Yes. The writing is like Miss Thornton's writing," Reggie said, "but it's even more like this." He produced the letter found in Miss Platt Robinson's blotting book and read it out. "You will not be superintendent long." "Just compare that, sir." Miss Platt Robinson became red. "Where did you get that?" she gasped. "You see the resemblance, Mr. Wheely. 6 weeks ago, when Miss Platt Robinson's sudden absence from London alarmed some of her friends, they called us in. Lomas and I went to her house to make inquiries. We found this letter on her writing table. We found some of this blue paper. We found one of her pens fitted with a J-nib. The letter has not been posted, you see. It is obvious that it was an experiment in imitating Miss Thornton's writing. The first of the series. The others were posted by Miss Platt Robinson herself. In the last few weeks, she has often been to Finsbury Park of nights. Fortunately, she was attended by a detective. He has seen her post 4 letters in the pillar box near Miss Thornton's house at the corner of Garden Road. Last Friday, he saw that the letter was blue. Miss Platt Robinson has been writing herself these letters in order to bring a false charge against her assistant superintendent. I don't know whether you wish the case to go to the public prosecutor or whether you will deal with it yourself. Obviously a case for the public prosecutor, said Lomas. Good heavens, woman! What have you done? Mr. Wheely cried. It's a conspiracy, Mr. Wheely, Miss Platt Robinson wailed. They've been working against me all through. They had no business in my house, setting detectives to watch me. Outrageous. Upon my word, said Mr. Wheely. Outrageous indeed. Is that all you have to say? Don't you see what you've done? You've involved the office in a scandal, a gross scandal, madame. It's intolerable, a most painful thing. You've betrayed my confidence in you in the most deplorable way. Really? Oh, you must go. Not back to the department, Miss Platt Robinson, said the secretary. Not, oh, Mr. Wheely, you don't mean that. Great heavens, woman, you don't think you can retain your position after this? Miss Platt Robinson's eyes swelled at him. The words which came to Miss Platt Robinson were, outrageous, really outrageous. She rose. She made strange noises. It's a conspiracy against me, she announced. You've all agreed to trump this up. I won't bear it. I'd rather resign. The door slammed behind her. Not really a nice woman, Reggie murmured. Yes, I mean no, of course, Mr. Wheely bleated. A most painful affair. At the same time, I'm bound to point out, Lomas, I do hope you agree with me. No reason why it should go any further. Now she's gone, I dare say Miss Thornton won't want to prosecute her. Lomas shrugged. Miss Thornton's a very good official, said the secretary. Yes, quite so, quite so. It is a mistaken policy to appoint these outsiders. I always thought so, said Mr. Wheely. Outside in the corridor, but I wish we could have sacked him too, said Reggie sadly. You never will, Lomas sighed, not while England's England. Even you have your limitations, Reginald. That comforts me, for I find you rather diabolical. No, only careful, said Mr. Fortune.